this year and during the latter part of last year as well, we've seen an accelerated trend to migration through illegal means from Sri Lanka. So could you start off by giving us an overview of the extent of the problem after the year 2010?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's illegal. There's nothing illegal about someone seeking asylum. The reason they seek asylum is because they are under threat. The legal definition is somebody who has a well-founded fear of persecution, and many people in Sri Lanka do have a well-founded fear of persecution given the behavior of the government in the last few years. Uh, but we are seeing a lot more people coming out of Sri Lanka to other countries. The first place they usually go to is India, but then they try to make their way to other countries. I'm calling you from London. There are a lot of people in the UK. There are a lot of people in Canada, Switzerland, Norway, the United States, Germany, various places. And the ones we speak to are afraid. They are afraid to go back. They're afraid for themselves. They're often afraid for their families. And then there are a lot of people who come out temporarily because they don't really want to leave Sri Lanka, but they just need to get out to be safe. And we do meet a lot of those people. Many of them are in your profession, who are in the media, and are afraid because they've been threatened for their work as journalists.
Okay. So over the last year, the latter part of last year and this year as well, most of the people who have left, are most of them leaving because of their perceived links or their links they had to the LTT?
I mean, there's no way to know most because we don't have a full picture. We only interview people we come into contact with. So I can't give you any statistics. I can't tell you overall what the trends are. I can only tell you what the people who talk to us tell us. Certainly some of them will have had links with the Tigers. Some of them will probably have been involved in the Tigers. Others will have had no links whatsoever. They'll simply be Tamils and have been accused of being sympathetic to the Tigers. As you know, the government calls lots of people Tiger sympathizers. They've called me a Tiger sympathizer, which is completely untrue. We were very critical of the LTTE when they were in existence. And they've called UN officials, other government officials sympathetic to the Tigers. So the environment is very bad for people who are critical of the government because they're often called Tiger sympathizers.
Okay. So there is a perception that most of these migrants or most of these people are trying to seek asylum are in fact economic migrants. So how do you differentiate between the genuine asylum seekers and the ones who are economic migrants in the work you do, the cases you deal with?
Well, obviously people who are migrating simply for a better life are economic migrants, and those are not the people that we're talking about. We're talking about people who have credible stories of having been threatened, having been attacked, having been arrested. We have extensive networks, and we're able to verify people's stories. We won't use people's stories unless they're verified, or if they're not verified, we'll say they're not verified. We'll say that they're just allegations. So we make a big difference, a great distinction between economic migrants and others.
Okay. So Human Rights Watch has documented several cases, and could you give us basically an overview of some of the more recent cases that you all have documented and the evidence that is an indication of the practice that still continues after the war ended?
Well, the cases we've been documenting have been of people who have come to European destinations, largely the UK, have been sent back, have applied for asylum and been rejected, have been sent back, and then have been harmed upon their return. And then they have found a way to get back out of Sri Lanka to another country, usually to the UK, but also to other European countries. And I should add Australia as well. We have some cases from Australia. And people have described, various forms of torture, being picked up and beaten, of being threatened, of being accused of being in the Tigers, of being told that if they complain, they will be harmed, that their family will be harmed, and some, pretty terrible forms of torture. I should add that, torture by the Sri Lankan security forces is nothing new. It's also not just against Tamils. We know that when the JVP was at its height, there was massive torture of Sinhalese in the south of Sri Lanka, and massive killings as well. And so really this is an endemic, generation-long problem of torture. It's been described by the UN Committee Against Torture in detail. Nobody really disputes that there's a serious torture problem. No one reasonable disputes it. And this is not just about the Tamil population. This is about all Sri Lankans who face this problem all across the island. And there needs to be a serious government effort at reform to stop these practices and hold the people who commit these abuses accountable. And we've seen no sign the government is taking this seriously on behalf of Tamils, on behalf of Muslims, on behalf of Sinhalese, on behalf of any of the communities.
Okay. I think one of the cases that you documented and he was subsequently interviewed on Sky News was Hari. People have raised the question that he did not make a police complaint here. He didn't seek justice through the judicial system. He didn't make a complaint, but subsequently just sought asylum abroad. Could you talk to us a little bit about that case and clarify some of the doubts that people have?
I can't talk to you about any individual case because in all the cases that we're involved with, people have asked for confidentiality, and I don't have permission to talk about any particular case. What I can tell you is that the reason that people don't go to the authorities is because the authorities are the problem. And if I were being tortured or if I were being threatened, I would certainly not go to the police in Sri Lanka and expect them to solve my problem because they have not been solving these problems for decades now. And it's very possible that the person who the complaint goes to will be connected to the people who have been causing this person the problem in the first place. So law enforcement is not a solution. The law enforcement authorities and institutions in Sri Lanka are not a solution for most Sri Lankans. There have been some cases where action has been taken, but they are the exception. And it would take a pretty brave person indeed to go to the authorities if they had been accused of being the Tamil Tigers and complain about being mistreated on that basis.
Okay. So in terms of the UK, the British policy towards asylum seekers from Sri Lanka, the HRW has called for the policy of the UK to be revised in terms with the new evidence and before claims actually assessed. So has there been any progress in that front?
There's a lot of discussion here. I was at a parliamentary discussion just 2 days ago about this. There are many people in the British establishment who think this policy is wrong. The problem is that it's part of a larger discussion about migration, immigration, asylum seekers, refugees, and that there are people from countries like Iraq and Syria and Libya who are here in fairly large numbers asking for asylum. And the British government is not sympathetic to asylum seekers, is cracking down on immigration. And I think that they are afraid that if they make the right decision on Sri Lanka, that they'll then have to make the same decision on other countries, and they'll have a lot of people here who they have to give asylum to. And they don't want to. This government came to power saying they were going to cut down the number of immigrants and the number of asylum seekers. So it's a case of policy against humanity, policy against the law. The law and humanity call for each case to be determined on its merits and for people to be given protection. The policy of the UK government right now still is to try to reject as many as possible.
Okay. Okay, so with regard to, again, failed asylum seekers, the ones who are deported and who are felt to be at risk, is there any way of monitoring their safety, say perhaps from UK embassy officials in Sri Lanka or by the IOM or any other INGO sort of group?
The British government says that they do it, but what we've discovered is they simply give people a piece of paper on arrival and a phone number. And many people won't even be able to access the phone or access the embassy through the phone number. They don't provide physical protection or monitoring of people's cases, and so they wait for people to report to them if they can. And the IOM and others are not geared up to do this right now. I mean, we've been saying you need to gear yourself up. You need to have the resources in place to do this if you're going to be sending people back in risky circumstances. And we're very unhappy with the British government's approach to this because they've been unwilling to take these steps. Do I think that this will change? Yes, I do. Do I think the British policy will change? Yes, I do. I think the main reason the policy will change is because the Sri Lankan government is continuing to allow or even authorize these abuses to take place. And until things change on the ground, people are going to need to seek asylum.
Okay. Okay, so over the past few, I mean, over these more recent cases, some of the other concerns that have been raised here is, like you said, some of the asylum seekers go to India, the others choose to go to the West. But the claims here made that they are looking for a better life because they are choosing to go to Western countries instead of countries like India, which is also party to the Constitution against torture and other cruel and inhuman degrading acts. So why do you think that they pick countries like the United Kingdom, for instance?
Well, I think that people don't feel that safe in India. There are reports of the Sri Lankan government authorities working with the Indian authorities to track down some people. We can't confirm those, but they have been made by serious people. Um, but even asylum seekers need to eat and need to have a future. And once they get to India, the economic circumstances for a lot of asylum seekers is very, very poor. And I think also, you look at the long-term refugee camps in Tamil Nadu, and the conditions there are absolutely miserable. And I think for people to imagine that that's going to be their life, and possibly for years and years to come, is a great incentive for people to try to get further, to try to get to a place where they're going to have a higher quality of life, possibly be safer. There are also a lot of people who have family in different countries. And so if you have a cousin or an aunt or an uncle or a parent, brother or sister in the UK or Germany or Switzerland, obviously you would try to go there because they would be usually be willing to take care of you if you can get that far.